Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Cybersecurity Threats in 2025. How can SCION help? Thank you all for joining. A warm welcome from my side. My name is Yvonne Cano-Helg. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Anapaya. Before we get started, maybe just a couple of housekeeping rules to keep in mind. First of all, there is a Q&A function available to you via Zoom. Feel free to use that throughout the webinar. You can ask your questions, and at the end of the webinar, we have a time slot available for answering all of your questions in chronological order. As you heard, this recording is in progress, so we are going to be sharing all of the follow-up material, including the recording and the presentation, as well as a survey, which will allow you to give us feedback about the format of the webinar and possibly any other topics that would be interesting for you that we can address in future webinars. And also, before we get started, just a quick introduction about Anapaya. We are a startup, a scale-up. We were founded in 2017. We emerged out of ETH Zurich, and we're on a mission to build a secure, reliable, and flexible internet. We have 35 employees from 20 different nationalities, which shows you that we're a very international team. We've been recognized by Gartner and Wavestone, and we've been ranked among the top 100 Swiss startups. Now, I would like to introduce you all to our presenter today. This is Sam Hitz. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Anapaya and also the co-founder. Sam, I pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for the warm introduction. And also from my side, a heartfelt welcome to everybody in the audience. Super happy to be here talking to you about some of the cybersecurity threats that we're facing this year, and also to explain a bit how SCION can help you dealing with those. Let me first start with giving you a brief rundown of what we're seeing today. We just started with the introduction, obviously. We will start with the cyber risks that we face today, give a little bit of context, what we're facing, what are some of the trends that we're seeing, and then we come to the meat of the webinar, obviously, the presentation, how SCION can really help, what SCION is for the ones of you here who are new here, right? And how it's being used also in practice to mitigate and defend against some of these cybersecurity threats. We'll close out with some conclusions from my side, and then we'll open the round for Q&A. As Yvonne said, use the Q&A feature liberally throughout the presentation. We'll also have 2 poll questions in the first part, so I encourage you to really participate. Great. With that, let me start. Let me start with a bold claim. The internet, despite its huge success, obviously, is the #1 operational business risk factor, right? Why do I say that? Because the internet has gotten huge. It's gotten humongous, right? There are today over 18 billion devices connected to the internet, which is, of course, great and a testament to its success, right? Connecting everything with anybody, so flexibly, so open. But of course, it's also a huge avenue for attacks, right? Many applications are on this network that are not intended to be publicly consumed by everyone, right? But by being on such a network, you're exposed to it. You're exposed to every actor of it. And the internet is actually really becoming more and more the backbone, not just of our economical or societal lives, right? We consume news, we browse social media, we stream videos, but also really for critical infrastructure. And that's just because the grade of interconnectivity is just rapidly rising, right? Every business today has dozens or hundreds of partners they need to connect to, backends they need to connect to. They have users, like residential users, that need to consume their services, etc. And the only real network today, the only real option you have today is using the internet. So to deal with that, the average enterprise today uses more than 40 different security applications to keep themselves secure, especially on the internet, right? These include remote access gateways to connect the remote workforce. This includes web application firewalls and intrusion detection systems, web proxies, etc., etc. And this just stems from the fact, right, that you are exposed to this huge amount of participants in this network, and you want to keep them on, right? So overall, internet hugely successful, but also a huge risk for your business, right? Before diving into some of the cybersecurity threats in particular, I would like to ask you, what cybersecurity risks is the most concerning for you today? There are four options for you to choose. If you choose the other option, then please also use the chat functionality to specify what that is and give you a bit of time.
All right, Sam. So we're about 30% there. A few more responses coming in. I'll give everybody a few more seconds to submit the response. Okay. A few more seconds. All right. Ending the poll now. And you should see the results, Sam.
All right, great. So it seems that with the specific examples that we have given, we hit the nail on its head. Most of you selected distributed denial of service attacks, which I'm very happy about because I'm definitely going to talk about those. Zero-day vulnerabilities with a close second, right? These are often also related to each other. And then, of course, ransomware as a topic that is on top of a lot of minds. But for you who have joined this webinar, probably you're more interested on the network level, where ransomware doesn't really play that much of a role. Great, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for participating. As you also say yourself, right, DDoS attacks are a huge cybersecurity issue today. We see that both the number and also the size of DDoS attacks have risen sharply, right? So year over year, over 50% growth, like in numbers, but also in size, right? The biggest DDoS attacks are today several terabits of aggregate bandwidth in size. And of course, the rise of DDoS attacks is supported by also the growing number of devices, the growing number of the internet, basically, right? Because each device on the internet is a potential attack vector. There are many, especially with Internet of Things, there are many unsecured devices, unpatched devices out there that can be integrated into a botnet, right? That then these bots can then be used for any kinds of volumetric or application layer DDoS attacks. But it's not just that, right? It's also changing business models from the attacker side. So today we see DDoS as a service. Like on the dark web, you can basically click your way through to hire such a service, right? And give them a target and do it for you. We see even networks like incentive-based networks where as a user, I can download actually a client that can then be used in a DDoS attack, right? And I get reimbursed, for example, through Bitcoin, if I can prove that I've participated my host in a certain DDoS attack. So it's not even that you need to find vulnerabilities nowadays to kind of accumulate enough power for such a DDoS attack. It's really by now a business model with clear incentives, and people are participating willingly in those, right? What's also very concerning is that critical infrastructure is, of course, a huge target, right? Especially finance is a huge target, both because the impact is very large, and also finance institutes have a lot of, have money to pay ransom. They're very upfront and center in everybody's mind. An outage in a financial service not only has financial consequences, but also reputation consequences, and so they're a very frequent target that we see. So that's one of the trends. A similar, related trend is also the risk of vulnerabilities, especially in critical security infrastructure, right? And what I've listed here are just some examples of zero-day vulnerability. So these are the most critical ones, where basically a zero-day is where a vulnerability that has not been patched yet, right? Where no patch is available, it's just been found. And all of these affect secure remote access solutions by some of the most known vendors, right? Like Palo Alto Networks, like Cisco, like Ivanti, like Fortinet. And I'm sure plenty of you use these kind of solutions today to protect your remote work infrastructure, basically, to let your workforce work remotely and connect to you remotely. And just in 2025, even though we're just ending Q1, right, we have already seen 3 of these that affect Fortinet, Palo Alto, and Ivanti. And since this infrastructure is super sensitive, any vulnerability that you find there usually means an attacker has get access to your internal network, and then depending on what kind of defense you still have internally, they can move laterally, exfiltrate data, or not. Then of course there's a defense in depth question there. I want to zoom in on one particular case of last year that concerned the Ivanti Secure Connect VPN, mostly because we were involved in mitigating the impact of this vulnerability for one of our customers. So what happened is that on January 10th, it was made public that there was a zero-day vulnerability in this Ivanti Connect Secure VPN solution that allowed remote code execution to basically gain access then to the internal network, right? What's interesting, or what's fascinating, but also frightening, is that within 5 days, over 1,700 corporates were reported to be compromised. And this is just from one source, right? So consider the number of cases that have not been reported. But within 5 days, we know for sure 1,700 corporates have been compromised by this. We have also then set up honeypots. Honeypots are basic infrastructure that can pretend to have a certain vulnerability, right? But then behind them, there's actually nothing. But they look like to an attacker that they run a software, in this case, this Ivanti software that has a certain vulnerability. And what we saw is that between setting up this honeypot and it being exploited, there were a few hours. So that indicates also that the detection of a vulnerable service, of this vulnerable service, and the exploitation was basically fully automated, because otherwise you will not be exploited within a few hours of setting up a new service like this, right? We were involved in this because one of our customers also had this solution in use. Luckily, they were not compromised, and I mean, I cannot say for sure, but definitely also because they took very decisive action by basically limiting the exposure of their remote service infrastructure on the internet using SCION. And this is where I want to transition now into the how can SCION help you with these kind of cybersecurity threats. And I will come back to this example in a bit. But first, I would like to gauge a little bit what kind of audience we have here today. So here's the next poll question. Do you agree with this statement? I understand how SCION works.
All right, Sam. So we've got a mixed bag here, getting the results here being submitted. I'm going to allow people to submit their responses some more, give a few more seconds here. All right, looks like everybody has more or less participated. Oh, no, a few more. All right, ending the poll now. And Sam, you should see the results.
Great. So it's very evenly spread amongst the four choices. I'm very happy to see that actually the majority of you have selected the fourth option. That means we have new faces in here that hear for the first time about Sign. But of course, I'm also very thankful and happy for people that have been using maybe Sign or have been exposed to Sign and they're still interested to listen to what I have to say. So great to see that there is really everything from complete beginner to Sign expert already. Great. Of course, I cannot go into super much detail how Sign works because that would fill hours, honestly. But what I'll try to give you the most important aspects of it and what makes it unique, and then how it's also deployed and how it can be used in practice, right? So let's start with what Sign is. Sign is a new internet architecture that we have been developing at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, of which Anapaya is also spin-off, right? Over the last more than a decade. Actually, I'm personally involved for more than 12 years now in this work. Sounds scary, right? New internet architecture. So what makes it different from today's internet? There is this pillar of Sign, the most important one. Well, there's three, but really the most important and the most central one is this notion or this pillar of path control, right? Path control in the sense that I, as a sender, I can choose the path, the end-to-end path that my packet should take through the network, through this internet, through this Sign internet, right? This allows me to immediately, implement use cases such as geofencing, right? I have maybe very sensitive, maybe also regulated data, right? In healthcare, that's often the case, that must stay within a certain jurisdiction. Let's say it must stay within a European jurisdiction. It can never cross the United States. That is actually for the finance institutes quite interesting. Obviously, it should not go to China or Russia or whatever, right? If you have path control, end-to-end path control, you can ensure that this is actually the case, provided that these paths cannot be changed, of course. On the internet, if you compare this to the internet, right, you have zero control over how your data travel through the internet. You can choose your internet service provider, or maybe two of them, if you want to be redundant. But then what happens beyond them, that's really out of your control, right? You can, of course, also use this then to use the network more optimally. For example, you can choose low latency paths for some applications that are latency sensitive. You can use paths that give you the highest throughput for database backups, for large file transfer, anything that uses a lot of throughput, right? And these paths, low latency and high throughput, they're usually not the same ones. So that's path control on the sender side. But then there is also the flip side, because what Sign doesn't allow you is to choose any possible path there might be, right? The Sign path control is actually a split responsibility between sender, backbone network in between, and the receiver. So the sender chooses the path ultimately, but it chooses from a set of possible paths that it can choose from. So me now, as a receiver, let's say I'm an operator of a critical infrastructure, I can control who gets access to my path information, who gets access to the path that leads to me, right? And with that, I actually have a very fine-grained control where, in which networks my service is even exposed, right? If I want to expose it to the internet, then I make my path information available publicly. If I have a very specific target audience, then I make my path information only available to that target audience. And then for everybody else, there is no network path that leads to me, right? And so I don't exist. So that's really the core of Sign, this path control. And derived from that, you have multi-pathing, you can use multiple at once. That's super great for resiliency. I'll come to that. I'll show you an example of this later, combined with fast failover, etc. And everything else around Sign is basically to ensure that these paths are secured, right? That once they have been created, they cannot be changed anymore, because if they're not secured, then basically, your geofencing guarantees go out of the window. If you cannot trust the path that you're using, that this path cannot be changed anymore, then of course your packets could go anyway. So these are then kind of the other pillars of SCION, but they're all in the service of this path control. Now that sounds all great and a bit abstract. How is this being deployed in practice, right? How can a new internet architecture be rolled out into the existing world, right? And let me walk you kind of through an example or an ecosystem where we have various players here, right? You might have a headquarter that needs to connect to a branch office, to partners. It has something in the cloud, but there are also remote workers and customers. These are residential users. And all of this needs to be connected together. And today, really, the only option that you have is the internet. And so with SCION, we need to also build kind of an internet, right? Because in the end, we want to connect all of them together, and we want to give you then the control to select actually who can get paths to me and who can see what. But after all, it needs to be possible to connect all of these things together. So what's needed? Definitely a backbone network, right? And internet, just like today's internet. And just like today's internet, the SCION internet is built and run and operated by internet service providers that run and deploy SCION routers, SCION backbone routers, right, and interconnect these SCION routers. And you can think of this backbone network really of this set of SCION routers that are operated by these different entities, and a SCION path. These SCION routers, they act like waypoints, right? A SCION path is actually a sequence of interfaces of SCION routers. So think like a map, and you have waypoints, and you basically create paths through this waypoint, right? That's the backbone. Now, of course, you need something that makes that backbone usable for all of these different entities. And consider we cannot upgrade applications, nor hosts, nor local networks, because that would be crazy, right? You're introducing a new network protocol and we require everybody to upgrade something. That will never work. So what we have created is basically a translation gateway, right? An IP to SCION translator, which in our product lingo is called Anapaya Edge or Anapaya Gate. They're just different form factors, and they're really the primary use case for these are I take IP-based communication and translate it into SCION. And that means that all your existing applications, all your existing hosts can transparently use the SCION network, right? If they communicate through such an edge gateway, such as SCION IP and SCION translation device. The secondary purpose is then, of course, these are the devices that can make these path decisions, that can control who gets access to paths, that can base their path decision on optimal performance, etc. Right? That's the secondary purpose. That's then using the power of SCION. And the edge is that's a physical or a virtual appliance that you would install in your DC or in your virtual private cloud or in your branch office, much like a router today, right? And the gate infrastructure is actually a carrier-grade IP to SCION translation, right? These are operated by ISPs in their networks, and they basically allow users in their networks through these gates to access the SCION internet and to access destinations in the SCION internet. So these are really, this is how it's deployed today. Now, how can this be used in a specific use case now to basically protect your, in this case, let's say the remote access infrastructure of your company, right? So you would have these three different sites, your data center, your HQ, your cloud, and maybe you need to connect to all of them, right, from home. So you need to connect your sites to the SCION internet using the Anapaya Edge. So it's visible and it's reachable in the SCION internet, right? And maybe in the cloud or in the HQ, and in all three of them, you would have behind the edge, you would have your remote access infrastructure. Now then the second piece of the puzzle are these gate ISPs, right? And basically you select the gate ISPs or the gate instances even, it's very fine-grained, on which you want to expose your service, right? Your remote access service in this case. And that has the effect that your service is only visible exactly within the networks of these gate ISPs, for users in these gate ISPs, right? And if you have, for example, only a few networks in France where your users sit, then you could just expose it there and nowhere else. And so if somebody sits, for example, in Romania, they would not even know about your service. They have no way of finding them, right? This is basically to reduce your attack surface. And how this can impact, or how such a setup can really impact the attack surface, you can see here. This is a live example, a deployed example of a medium-sized Swiss bank that moved their VPN access infrastructure off of the internet and into the SCION internet, and then exposed their remote access infrastructure only in certain networks within the SCION internet, right? For a time, they let this run side by side. And then actually this Ivanti vulnerability happened. And luckily, they were already prepared, right? They could then just say, well, now we're going to shut down the internet access. And now we will only be exposed to the SCION internet, right? But while they were dual homed, let's say, internet and SCION internet, they were running some interesting experiments for us. And for them, they were just collecting data, what they get through the internet and what they get through the SCION internet. And they classified this in scans, port scans, what kind of services and applications are running. This is the reconnaissance step that always kind of comes before the attack, right? You need to find out what's running where, with which version, is there a vulnerability. You get lots of these, 9 million in a quarter. You get also some of these, of course, on the SCION internet, because you get this from everywhere. There can also be benign scans, right, from security vendors, etc. You get some of these also on the SCION internet. But then they also classified what they considered malicious attacks. And malicious attacks are, for example, you can recognize them based on packet signature, right? Because they usually contain a certain payload or certain sequence of packets that would trigger a certain vulnerability. And if you have an intrusion detection system that has these signatures, you can classify them. So they got almost 90,000 within a quarter of these malicious attacks. So this is like, think about, a thief walking around your house and looking for entries. That's the left side, the scans. And then the thief actually tried to break into your window or your door on the right side. And on the SCION internet, they got exactly 0. Doesn't need to be 0, of course, it was in this period of time. There could still be somebody sitting in the networks where you're exposed to that wants to attack you. But even if that happens, because you limit your exposure so much, you have a much better chance to actually, A, defend against that, suppress it, and B, if something happens, you have jurisdiction, right? If you know, okay, this is only exposed in Switzerland, you have the Swiss jurisdiction, right? And you don't need to go after somebody far away around halfway around the world. So that is the impact that you can see in the real world. And just to give you also an idea that SCION is really an established standard, at least in Switzerland, and not something that is completely new, and you would be basically buying the latest, hottest deep tech that nobody ever has tried. Just to show you where we are in Switzerland, right? We started out with building a network for our finance system, right? That's basically how Anapaya started. Today, this SCION secure Swiss finance network connects more than 100 banks doing all kinds of critical interbanking applications, right? The most critical of which is the Swiss interbank clearing, which every day clears 300 to 400 billion Swiss francs. So imagine if this infrastructure would be down, then actually the Swiss economy would tank. So this shows you SCION and what I've showed you with our products, Anapaya Edge and the Corp and the partners that are running this, they're running this in the highest criticality of environments, right? Then based on this infrastructure and based on this network that we have, we could also expand then into the healthcare. Today, 50,000 doctors are accessing, electronic patient records. are accessing tumor boards or research results, exchange between clinics and research labs, healthcare providers, all within, because healthcare is often nationalized, all within kind of a sovereign network within Switzerland that everybody has access to, that should have access to, but it's kind of isolated from the rest, right? And this is something that SCION makes possible. Here you have this gate infrastructure through which, for example, these doctors can connect, right? We have expanded the finance network also into retail payments. There is 300,000 point of sales that will be connected to this. Today, it's the backend for the retail payments that is connected through a SCION network. And also in the utilities case, where it's very much an IoT case, right? You have this distributed power generation, solar panels, smart meters. All of this is actually today connected over the internet. And if you can elevate this into a more controlled, less exposed network, you just gain a lot. You reduce a lot of risk that you might have. You don't reduce everything, right? The risk to zero. There is a remaining risk, and you need to combine this also with other solutions. But it's just super effective if you can decrease your exposure by basically 99+%. Finally, I've talked mostly about this path control and how you can hide services, right? That's of course not the only benefit of SCION. The prime benefit is also just the sheer resiliency that SCION brings, right? And with its path control, with its multipathing, and I just want to show you, this is one of the networks, the Secure Swiss Finance network, that never had an outage so far, right? And of course, before it went live, it went through rigorous testing, and we not simulated, but we actually introduced, link failures, core router failures. Entire providers in this landscape were being taken offline, and basically the test environment and the applications, those were the real banking applications running over it. They never even experienced a session outage, right? For them, this was transparently handled, and so the network has been going on since 2020, actually, which still include all this testing uninterruptedly. So there are sessions that have been running since then. So this is, of course, also a benefit that you get, right? Between when your traffic is in the SCION network, once it's there, you have incredible resiliency. You're not locked into a single provider. You have all of these different paths. And as long as at least one path works, right, your data will get from A to B. Right. In the interest of time, looking at time, I need to close up, so we'll have some time for questions. I want to end with a few key takeaways, which are, for me, very important if you would take those away from today's webinar. First, SCION is business continuity, right? Path control, multipathing, fast failover, all of this ensures that your data will basically always get from A to B if there is a network path. So it's really always on connectivity. Then SCION is also proactive security, right? SCION is not really blocking any attacks or mitigating any of it, but it really eliminates the target by removing basically the public exposure of the target, right? And so you cannot attack what's not there, so you're preventing the attack in the first place, right? So you're not blocking anything, and this is kind of a paradigm shift, right? It's very powerful with this path control, how you can control the exposure and how you can basically prevent the attack from happening in the first place and not just mitigating or blocking it after it happened. And then finally, SCION is ready to be used, right? It has been used in the most critical of environments for years now. We at Anapaya have invested a lot of effort into making it usable and integratable in your existing infrastructure, especially also with this edge and gate products, right, that transparently translate between SCION and IP. And so you can just plug and play this into your existing infrastructure, into your existing applications. None of your user devices need to be updated, and you will just get the benefits of the SCION network for you. And finally, of course, we started out in Switzerland, but we're not only in Switzerland because SCION as a whole is, of course, a borderless technology, right? While our core deployment is here in Switzerland, we've also started now international expansion. Since last year, end of last year, we're also in the Benelux, and in Germany and France. And we have already signed up a great set of partners to work with us to build the SCION backbone. And as we speak, we're onboarding and conducting the first customer proof of concepts also in these remote geographies. So if you're joining us today from one of these countries and outside Switzerland, rest assured that SCION is already there or will be there within the next month.
Thank you so much, Sam. If you are interested in becoming SCION-enabled, you can book a meeting here with us. There's a QR code. Or if you have additional questions after the webinar for Sam, you have his email here. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and I wish you all a very nice day.